Hi everyone, my students and I are really inspired by Mexican folk art, specifically these awesome little calacas or skeletons that represent humans and their funny little lives. We are going to be making some dioramas to celebrate the Day of the Dead coming up in November, and I thought I would share with you how we are creating these little skeletons that are fully poseable because we put them together with clay and pipe cleaners. Let's look at some of the materials that you'll need, and then we'll show you step by step how to make the parts and put them together. I'm using polymer clay because I had it around and I like the heavy feel of the finished product, but you could use Model Magic or air dry clay if you have it. You also want to have a few tools to poke your clay into shape. I like to have something pointy for the tiny bits and something a little bit bigger because you will use them to press eye sockets into your clay. It's great to have a white pipe cleaner if you want it to match your clay when you're done, but whatever you have, you just probably need one for each skeleton. It's good to have a pair of scissors to snip your pipe cleaner into the sizes that you need to make the arms, the legs, and the little neck. You only need about a handful of whatever your clay is. I'm taking my handful and I'm splitting it in half, and then I'm going to take that half and split it into two smaller bits. One of these will be the skull. Roll that ball, and then it's always worth it to take a couple of minutes to smooth out the creases using your hands, your fingers, or a tool. Now grab I use the back of a paintbrush, but you could also use a pencil to smush in 2 eye socket holes. And maybe you're happy with your skull just like that. It's pretty cute. But if you want your skull to look a little bit more realistic, you could just squish around the bottom half of the sphere and then smooth it out with your fingers. We are not going for realism. This is a very stylized, cute little skeleton, so don't worry about it too much. Everyone's going to know that that is a skull. Now I'm taking my pointy tool and making 2 little nose holes, and I'm using the side of the pointy tool to create some tooth marks. And maybe you'll have to do this a few times. You might have to squish up your skull and try it again. That's not a problem. Have fun and do whatever problem solving you need to do until you like your skull. Every piece that we make is going to need a hole where the pipe cleaner will be inserted later. So that's where the neck hole is. I'm taking the other small bit and I'm going to roll it up and squish it, and I will squeeze the bottom of it a little bit, and that's because this is supposed to look sort of like a rib cage. This is the torso of the skeleton. So you want it to be pretty thick at the top, not as thick as the skull, and then squish it down because your rib cage does get thinner and more narrow at the bottom. But the top half needs to be thicker because, as you'll see later, we're actually going to put a hole through shoulder to shoulder where a pipe cleaner will go through. You could add some details here with your tools. You could change the shape of it to look more like the bottom of your rib cage, or you can leave it as a rectangle. Maybe you're going to put clothes on your skull and your skeleton and it doesn't matter. Now you're going to get a little bit more clay for 2 hands and eventually 2 feet. So these are obviously smaller parts. Again, you will roll a ball and smush it and then squeeze half of it. The part that you squeeze will make a thicker wrist because we do need to stick the toothpick into it later to make that hole for the pipe cleaner. So we're rolling the ball, squishing it, and squeezing half of it to make this little triangle shape with one thick end and one flatter end. If you want to get somewhat fancy, you could use a tool to smush in a sort of mitten hand. So I just smushed it through the wider part of the hand, and you can use your fingers or your tools to fix that up however you like. It might be a good idea to figure out what your skeleton is going to be doing. Is it holding a guitar or a broom, because if you want it to hold on to something later, maybe you want to curl up those fingers a little bit. Just make sure that you don't squish your little hands so thin that you can't stick a hole in for the pipe cleaner. Now that pipe cleaner is going to go right through the top of that torso like I mentioned before. So we have 2 wrist holes, and then we will need a hole that goes right through the top of that thicker torso part. That way you'll be able to push one pipe cleaner all the way through and just put a hand on either end. Now you remember that we made a hole in the bottom of the skull, so that means we need a hole in the top of the torso, so a little bit of pipe cleaner can connect the two. It really helps your skeleton look expressive when you can tilt the head back and forth. After you make that neck hole, make sure that you put the pipe cleaner or your toothpick through the shoulder holes again to make sure it didn't get closed up. Then we added a hole in the bottom of the torso, and I made that hole a little bit bigger because I like to just fold a pipe cleaner in half and stick it into that hole to make 2 legs. And the feet are the same steps we used for the hands. You roll a ball, squish it, and squeeze one end. Then you can use your tool to insert a hole in the thicker heel end of your feet, because the pipe cleaners are going to go right into those so that your skeleton can stand flat on its feet. This is where the pipe cleaners will go. We'll stick them in after everything is baked, if you do need to bake, and after your air dry clay is dried, because you might want to add a little bit of glue into each of those connection points. If you're using polymer clay, it is time to bake. You notice that we have an extra piece of clay, and that is because a lot of people realize that it would be cool to have some other little accessory. So maybe a pet or a guitar or whatever you might need for this little guy. So now is the time to make it so you can bake everything at once. Before you put your project into the oven, make sure that all of those holes are clear with your tool, because once it's baked, you will not really be able to easily drill a hole in there. The thicker parts, the skull and the ribs, will take longer to bake than the hands and the feet. I recommend you do not use a toaster oven, but I didn't have a choice. I was creating this video very quickly at work. The problem with a toaster oven is it's great for stuff like shrinky dinks, but it will almost always burn polymer clay, even if you have it in less of the time at a lower temperature. And that's simply because the clay is too close to the heating elements. I don't mind this. I do it all the time because I like to cover all of my polymer clay in acrylic paint anyway. I like the glossy look that it gives it and a brighter color. So once your stuff is cool and hardened, you could add some details with Sharpie or markers and insert your pipe cleaners to be however you like them and pose your little guy. Like I said, if you want to add some glue, you can do that. Now that your little skeleton is done, I hope you have fun creating with it, and thanks as always for watching our video.